I know your schedule. I've been following that.
I think we're live now, guys.
Are we live?
Yeah, we're live. So welcome back, everyone. We're into the last session of day 2, which has been another interesting and educational experience for us all, which leads very nicely into our next very special guest and also mentor, who has a huge amount of experience in terms of regulatory and no doubt many other aspects to, I guess, entrepreneurial kind of support and business. With that in mind, we'd like to introduce Simone Martin, who's calling in from the glamorous part of the world, which unfortunately we're not enjoying so much in terms of nice weather. Maybe Simone, you can kind of give a bit of an intro and tell us a little bit more about where you're at and what you're doing right now.
Sure. First, I want to thank the organizers of the TDeFi Open Day project for the invitation. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in Dubai, but I'm presently in Anguilla, which is one of the islands in the Northern Caribbean. We do have a very robust regulatory framework that is actually engaged with the crypto community with further legislative developments. For myself personally, I have over 19 years of regulatory experience in almost all regulated fields, and that includes investment business, fiduciary services, AML, CFT compliance. I'm an FATF trained assessor. And so I think the experiences that I bring, the varied experiences, could provide some useful discussion points for today's meeting. So just delighted to be here and to have the opportunity.
Great, thank you for that introduction. So maybe we could start off. What's some of the challenges that you're seeing right now in terms of projects, and maybe how it's changed over the, I guess maybe over the last few years in terms of the crypto landscape, and yeah, maybe you could start there.
Sure. So let me just start with governance. I prepared a brief presentation, but I'm happy to do this free flowing. One of the things that we've seen in relation to some of the developments in the crypto space is that governance was not necessarily always baked into some of the projects that came about. And what that means is that to have someone who provides oversight at various stages of a project to make sure that there's engagement with the relevant stakeholders, and basically to make sure that things aren't going to run off the rails the minute you take your hands off of a particular crypto project. For persons who are looking at DeFi and NFT projects, one of the concerns that regulators tend to have is that this may be something akin to the early ICO days, where you have a lot of things that attract a lot of money, and a problem happens and people just cut and run. That is not something that we would want to see continuing in the DeFi space. There have been some early concerning projects. And so it's one of the things that we think it's important for people to think about when they're getting into these projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if you have a presentation, Dave, unless we have like precise, I'm sure we have precise questions, but don't you think we should have the presentation if you have that already?
Well, it can flow, and that's up to David. But one of the things I also wanted to say is that certainly these are my views and not the views of my employer. Let me just get in that disclaimer. And yes, so I think once that disclaimer is in, happy to do the presentation or happy to have this, whichever direction you want it to flow in.
Yeah, let's begin with the presentation that way. David, you were saying, yeah, please go ahead.
No, I don't think there's any set structure here, Simone. I think this is very much up for you. You know, if you provide put something together, then yeah, please feel free to go along with that. Just looking to maximize your time as best as possible.
No problem. You have me for a bit. So some of the things that I wanted to talk about today were in relation to the global pressures that are actually impacting DeFi and NFT projects. I think that is important to give a bit of context as to where we find ourselves. and then to look at where regulation and DeFi meet, and particularly the fiduciary services. So I've touched lightly on that in relation to governance and overseeing certain projects. And then to just cap off the prepared presentation in relation to future outlook and opportunities. I do believe that there are a lot of opportunities there. So it's just for persons to be well informed and to take advantage of those opportunities. So just to start on the global pressures shaping DeFi projects. What I've seen, and I think everyone here can agree to, is that the demand for innovation is tremendous. This is an increasingly globalized world, and there are different parts of the world, including the Caribbean, that are not necessarily fully served by existing financial services solutions. And even beyond financial services, I understand that there are projects that are not in the traditional financial services space. And these jurisdictions would greatly benefit from the engagement of these innovators. I think from that perspective, it is one of the things that have encouraged persons to pick up and start building certain protocols to address these opportunities, because those are definitely opportunities. But other things that are shaping the DeFi space, and that may not be shaping it as much before, but will be shaping it more so in the future, is the attention of regulators, the attention and the mandate of regulators. Now, regulators are not bad people. What we do have at our focus is that we have certain mandates that we have to adhere to. And one of the primary mandates is financial stability, and another one is consumer protection. So from those bases, we look to what is happening in a particular space, including DeFi, especially DeFi, is getting a lot of attention, to see whether there are risks to consumers, or if a project can potentially blow up and cause financial instability, which are two of the things that we definitely do not want. It's not that regulators are opposed to innovation, but we have to make sure that those basic tenets are being maintained. And then equally, there are some concerns that are being driven by the traditional financial services players. There's a lot of FUD in the space. And I say that because DeFi projects in particular are disruptors to traditional financial services markets, and everyone recognizes that. And if it is that you have certain projects coming along that can basically take you out of business, of course, there will be certain pressures and whether lobbying and other discussions to prevent certain DeFi projects from getting off the ground. So I think you have to be aware that there are those forces at work as well. So there are a lot of eyes on the DeFi space that present some concerns to different parties. And then more importantly, other parties are looking at the opportunities. And in a lot of those spaces, we actually are looking at both the threats and the opportunities for DeFi projects. And what I'm looking at, events like this actually highlight the positive work that is being done to get a more qualitative engagement from innovators. And to move on to the fiduciary duties, we spoke a bit about oversight, fiduciary duties and governance. We spoke a bit about governance at first, but in terms of fiduciary duty, one of the primary concepts of exercising your fiduciary duty is to have a duty of care. Make sure that you act in the best interest of the project. This is not an individual coder's moment of glory, because it's not just you this will impact. You have to pay attention to the impact of this project and act in the best interest of the project. Document what is being done. And most DeFi projects, I don't know of any DeFi project that was a solo event. So you have different personalities and people working together, but at the end of the day, once you're working towards the best interests of the project, at the end, and you document it, at the end, that goes a long way to demonstrate that you have taken on board some of the things that not just regulators, but potential customers will be looking at, or potential users and markets, governments would be keen to understand was considered in the development of a project. Transparency is also especially important. The transparency does not mean giving away all your secret codes. That is not what it means at all. The transparency is that, if there's a problem, say so. If you're having a delay in the project, say so, because that's one of the things that helps to build trust of all the stakeholders and the people who are looking on in that project. And just be accountable. So again, if something goes wrong, fess up. And what we've seen in the past with DeFi projects is that something goes wrong and people cut and run. And that doesn't go down well. It doesn't do well for the space. It actually creates a lot of negative press because now you're not there to tell your own story. So that's one of the other elements that I think is important for a successful DeFi project. In relation to governance, and I'm just looking at my notes really quickly here, governance in relation to regulation. Certain persons will say, well, this is a project and I'm doing this and it doesn't touch on the regulatory space of country X or country Y. What can help in determining that is focusing on what are the intended outcomes of the project. If you have clarity on that, that tends to help identify what a regulator or what position a regulator may be looking at it from, or a policymaker, because people are looking to see how a particular project may fall in scope. Do that at the outset, I think persons will save themselves quite a bit of a headache. Then there is, building in a governance framework to ensure that you have good compliance. Now, I'm not saying that a decentralized project will have a centralized compliance function. What I'm saying is that people in this space are brilliant. And so you can build and code and test with compliance in mind. And so once you understand the framework in which you're going to be operating in, it tends to be easier to bake compliance into your coding and into your protocols. So that is one of the areas that I think would be helpful for the community. And then the last point under governance is the topic of audits. And then there's also the topic of white papers. What we've also seen is that when white papers are developed, they're developed not realizing that there will be a number of persons who will lay their eyes on it. And so it's written for very specific audiences, which at times does not help your cause if it is that they're going to be reviewed by policymakers and governments and regulators and the like. And it's not that I'm saying to draft 2 sets of white papers. That's a no-no. Actually draft the white paper in mind with the thought in mind that you're going to have this document be reviewed by a number of different persons. Equally, it's also important to have an audit process to make sure there are no bugs in the protocol. And again, we've seen the disclosures from some past DeFi projects that audits have not been done, but people still invest. That the audit gives an independent verification that there is some sort of quality assurance from a third party who's not your friend and who doesn't have a vested interest in the project to make sure that this is something else that can be put out and published to the wider world to say, hey, this is a DeFi project that is serious about what it's doing. We are in this for the long haul and we are seeking to be successful in the space. And it also builds trust and confidence, which I think is necessary for this newer space. So keep that in mind when drafting your white papers and conducting your audits. And then lastly, the future outlook. I see a lot of opportunities. Regulators, like I said, are looking at DeFi projects and we're not going to look away. But this is an opportunity for you, the innovators, to actually engage with the regulators to help shape the discussion and shape the narrative. If you're not at the table, the conversation is still going to happen. But it's better for you to be at the table with regulators so that we understand what your concerns are, what your goals are, and that it's a symbiotic relationship that actually bears really good fruit for everyone involved. Financial inclusion, a lot has been said about that in the fintech space generally. What I'll say in relation to that is that it's still buffering, but DeFi projects definitely have an opportunity to help that fully load. And then lastly, and I must say it, several regions are waiting for you and waiting for DeFi projects because there's so many opportunities in far-flung areas of the world. I know on that side of the planet where you're at is one of the jurisdictions that would do well for DeFi projects, but also on this side of the planet. So there are a lot of opportunities that can be had and that remain untapped. So I'll stop there. And if there are any questions, please do let me know.
Oh, it's very, very useful. I guess my takeaway from that is make sure we engage early and make sure communication's a key part of that with regulators and stuff. I guess the only question I have, and I unfortunately we are running short on time. I don't know if you have time to be able to stay with us for some of these pitches, Simone.
I can stay for a bit.
Oh, that'd be great. But yeah, the only kind of question I would sort of put across then is, for those projects out there right now that are always thinking about, working or building or with low budgets until they do a raise, I guess legal frameworks and things like that can always be a bit of a headache for them or like a worry. So what advice would you give to somebody that doesn't maybe have a huge budget, but they should stay on the right side of regulators?
Right. So one of the things that I neglected to mention is that I do recognize that you might not have millions of dollars lying about for legal advice. And that is where the role of advisors, I think, definitely come into play. Once you get the right advisor who can offer their input and their knowledge, that tends to go quite a long way in helping you to navigate certain pitfalls. As it relates to regulation, regulators are open to actual innovators asking questions, in some jurisdictions more so than others. So not that we're offering you legal advice, but if an innovator has a question of, would this fall in scope? A simple email to the regulator tends to clear that up, and it won't cost you anything but the cost of that email, which is nothing. So the time and just to frame the question to the regulator in the jurisdictions that your project may be located or may be touching, that would assist greatly. And I think that type of discussion directly with the regulator. The question may be then, who is the regulator? Because in the crypto community, some persons are not familiar with who the regulators are in the jurisdiction or who the right regulator is, if there are a number of regulators. So many countries have a government website that may list them, but simple Google searches in a lot of cases can help. And if you are in multiple jurisdictions, sometimes one regulator can point you to the direction of who another regulator may be that you may need to touch on. So we're very helpful. We try to be as helpful as possible. We are not to be feared. We are people too. Questions sometimes garner useful answers.
That's amazing. Well, I would love to carry this conversation on for hours.
We're probably talking to the most sweetest of regulators. I've had experiences through like a plethora of regulators around the world, and that hasn't been as pleasant as with yourself. So, I mean, with all due respect to everyone, but yeah, we would love to hear more about these communications after the existing sessions. We're glad that you're here through a few sessions. Let's catch up again on that. Matt, shall we bring in the next guys in?
Yeah,
sure.
Thanks, Simone.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Simone. I look forward to having additional questions answered after the pitches. So I believe we have Geralt with us from Cyberify. Can you hear me?
Yep, correct. Hey guys.
Awesome. Let's since we're running short on time, why don't you give yourself an introduction and start the presentation?
Sure, yeah. A little bit change the timing. Yeah. Hey guys. So
give me one second, Gerald. I apologize for the rude interruption, but I think the team's going to switch their video now. Can we do that?
I think we're on now, Matt. Oh, hang on.
Yeah, our producer's telling us he's switching over the videos now. So let's go ahead and do that. In the meantime,